Hey, it's Paris. You know I love sparkly things, right? Like stars. Duh. And thanks to Hilton and AutoCamp, I just slept under them. Picture me, serving looks by the fire outside my luxurious Airstream, making s'mores with the kids, while a national park is our backdrop. The great outdoors meets Hilton hospitality. That's hot. Explore all the new ways to stay at Hilton.com. Hilton for the stay.
Are your business expenses playing hide and seek? With Uber for Business, the small spends that slip through the cracks, like rides and meals, go right where you need them. Because it integrates with leading expense platforms, you can say goodbye to surprise costs, missing dollars, or chasing receipts. Everything's track downable. Uber for Business. Make small steps that make a big impact. Learn more at uber.com/small steps.
Hello everyone, this is Fortune's Wheel and I'm Jonathan. And today we're introducing our first Patreon series, setting up background knowledge for Season 4, Poland Finds Its Place. I want to sincerely thank all of you who are listening to this, as you have generously donated to the production of this podcast and shown that you believe in what's happening here. There are no words for my appreciation, so I'll simply offer a heartfelt thank you and a promise to continue to deliver the best content I can. So, on to our first members-only series. Episode 1 is entitled King of the North. I hope you enjoy the show. For the first 7 years of his life, young Mieszko, son of Szymon, a local leader of the Polans, was blind. And he was, suddenly and without warning, given his sight. This story, as brief as it is, was told originally by Gallus Anonymous, a monk that, as you can probably guess, we have no clue as to who it might be. Now, being a monk, he no doubt meant this blindness in childhood metaphorically and probably not literally. There was, in fact, absolutely no way for him to know about the details of Mieczysław's earliest years, as they lived more than 170 years apart. Mieczysław was born around 930, while Gallus Anonymous wasn't writing until the 12th century. It's a legendary start to a legendary making, though. The name Mieczysław, by the 11th century, was shortened to Mieszko, and Mieszko would carve out a very impactful place in the evolution of Eastern Europe. Other than this strange account by Gallus, history's left us next to nothing as to Mieszko's early life. Upon his father's death, we know that Mieszko took over his father's role as another ranking member of the Piast dynasty of leaders of the Polans community. But we still don't have a firm idea as to which lands were his around the year 960. So let's take a look around modern-day Poland. Modern-day Poland is, as we know, the land sandwiched between Germany and the Czech Republic to the west, Slovakia to the south, Ukraine and Belarus to the east, and Lithuania and Russia to the north. The vast central plains of Poland are called simply the Polish Plains, and this region's ability to grow food is outstanding. These plains include the cities of Warsaw, Treblinka, Poznan, and Lodz. To the south, there are the Polish uplands, which include Wrocław and Kraków, which sit at the base of two mountain ranges. The Sudetes, with its highest peak of Śnieżka at 1,602 feet above sea level, which borders the Czech Republic. And then you have the Beskids, with its highest peak of Babia Hora at 1,723 feet, which borders Slovakia. Now, heading back downhill to the north, over the central Polish plains, and you'll see we have two distinct lake and lowland regions called Pomerania, which borders Germany and the Baltic Sea, to the east, and to the east lies the Masurian Lake District, holding over 2,000 lakes of varying sizes and depths. Then, as now, Poland has a rich agricultural region throughout, fed by its many rivers, consisting of potatoes, rye, sugar beets, wheat, and oats. Though, as you can imagine, 1,000 years ago, there was no large-scale industrial farming happening like there is today. However, the raising of sheep, cows, horses, pigs, and chickens was pretty commonplace, and the forests of the 11th century certainly held plenty of large game to hunt, unlike today. Though, to give credit, Poland still prides itself in keeping a close eye on its forested lands with a serious shift toward conservation in recent decades. Now, wrapping up our geographic look at Poland, starting high in the Beskids near the Polish-Czechoslovakian border, the Vistula River carves its way northeast, then back northwest, before heading straight north, emptying into the Baltic Sea near Gdansk. The Vistula is the main waterway through Poland, but it also gives birth to other major rivers too, such as the San, the Narew, and the Bug rivers. The only other river that cuts through Poland is one that it shares a western border with Germany, and that one's called the Oder. Now, it's been a real challenge trying to pin down exactly where, 1,000 years ago, the Holy Roman Empire began and Poland ended, as well as where Kievan Rus territory began and, well, Poland ended. And if you can imagine it, it was even harder trying to find information about a time period an extra 50 years before that, around the time of Mieszko's ascendancy after his father's death. So see, Poland didn't exist yet. There were many, many Slavic peoples living in what came to be called the Polish Plains, the Masurian Lake District, and the Polish Uplands, and other smaller regions in the area as well. There were a lot of different communities in pre-Poland Poland. 2,000 years ago, the Celts swept through the continent. But in the early Middle Ages, it was the various Gothic groups who moved on to become Ostrogoths, the Visigoths, the Franks, the Saxons, the Jutes, and the Angles, among many others, who roamed and settled this area. In the 6th century, the Avars shot through from the Asian steppes and didn't stop their contact with these residents until the 8th century, followed closely by the Magyars, though they kept to the south mainly. Accepting the increasing raids by Vikings as they pushed through to the Volga River and setting up Kiev and Novgorod, the 8th, 9th, and 10th centuries was a fairly peaceful time period for this region. These tiny communities began merging into 4 main cultural groups: the Veleti, the Obotrites, the Rani, and the Heveli. These then broke down further into distinct groups that then made great tribes, or larger collections of communities, banding together for defensive and economic reasons. Among the Veleti there were the Cassinians, the Circopani, the Tolensi, and the Ridarier. Among the Obotrites there were the Vagrians and the Vornabi, the Palabians, the Traviani, and the Drevani, as well as folks we mentioned a long time ago when talking about Olaf Tryggvason, the Wends in modern-day northern Germany. Among the Heveli, there were the Sorbs, the Lucisi, the Messeni, and finally the Rani lived alongside groups such as the Ukri, the Morisi, and the Dosani, the Samzizi, and so many more. Larger groups such as the Pomeranians, the Masovians, the Vistulans, the Slovaks, the Moravians, the Czechs, the Slezans, and the Polans soon became big names in the region, though, leading into the 10th century. So why share all this? To confuse you, dear listener? Well, of course not. I went through this only to showcase how diverse pre-Poland Poland really was leading up to Mieszko's time in the 10th century. And diverse it certainly was. Now, I want to add one thing. I didn't even begin to scratch the surface as to all the various tribal names in this area either. It broke down so much further. So Slavs began using more and more land in permanent settlements, though the vast majority of pre-Poland Poland was still left pretty wild and forested. In fact, much of the defenses for the Slavic communities consisted of their unique and skillful abilities to use the waterways and forests to their military advantage against enemies. Unfortunately, Vikings and Pechenegs and others learned their tactics and began, for lack of a better term, slave harvesting them. After so many decades of the practice, Slavs made their ways aboard shipment after shipment of cargo to far-off exotic places such as England, Cordoba, Constantinople, and Baghdad, and probably much, much farther. In fact, Slavs were such huge parts of the cargo at the time that the name for what they were sold as became the very same word we use today for anyone being bought and sold as property: slave. It was due to the periodic raids that the Slavic peoples began coalescing into larger and larger groups. You can't really blame them. Now, don't make the mistake thinking that these grew into cities, though, like what we see in other parts of Europe during this time and even after. No, these were simply what archaeologists called, again, great tribes, or communities of between 50 to 80 families. Still, this was a much larger settlement than what had been seen in the area previously. Now, while the Scandinavians settled the riverlands out east and reorganizing themselves into the Rus and then the Germanic peoples formed their own kingdoms in the west, and the Huns and Magyars grew together to form a sort of proto-Hungarian people, the peoples populating pre-Poland Poland, on the whole, were just now making the shift away from a shepherding and hunting way of living toward a more sedentary, agricultural society, at least en masse. They began using plows and oxen in the 9th and 10th centuries to break the rich, fertile soil of the Polish plains area. And they even started using a wider spread use of setting forests on fire to make room for more planting. This had the added benefit of creating a natural fertilizer for their fields too, as ash is still packed with necessary carbons and other nutrients needed for good quality, healthy fields. It was during the 9th and 10th centuries that we see an expansion of planned orchards as well, allowing these folks to enjoy apples, peaches, and cherries. According to a Jewish traveler named Ibrahim ibn Yaqub, passing through the area in the 900s, as well as some recent archaeological discoveries to back up his claims, Slavs in the area also created bathhouses. Another traveler recorded in the 900s that many of these people had the knowledge of a honey-based alcoholic drink they made for various festivities throughout the year, not to mention their expertise in the playing of shakers and flutes. Heading into war, these Slavs wore leather straps for light armor, though helmets wouldn't be seen for quite a while still. They carried spears, bows and arrows, and with the constant struggles against the raiding Vikings and Rus, axes soon became a mainstay as well. The Slavic peoples there were certainly a fierce group of warriors when they needed to be, but they lacked the worldly experience of people like the Rus and the Vikings and the Saxons and the Danish and so on, as well as the fact that they never grew, well, until the 10th and 11th centuries, they never grew into larger communities. These were reasons that led to Slavs being such, well, again, for lack of a better term, easy targets. I really hate to use such a term because the people themselves were known for their own ferocity, but without numbers and experience, they were simply outnumbered and outgunned. Now, around the 10th century, leading up to Mieszko's day, these great tribes began coalescing power at the top of each community's natural hierarchy. Dietmar of Merseburg, whom I've mentioned before on the podcast, was no fan of the Polish and Slavic peoples to his east, but he gave credit where it was due and reported that leading men of each community would convene a war council of sorts with neighboring tribes within the great tribe to decide upon matters of war. These positions of authority led to more control over their home populations, creating a centralized governmental structure, leading to hereditary succession, as well as taxes. A curious thing also developed during this consolidation of power. Though the Druzina wasn't isolated to the pre-Poland Poland, we know that many areas across Europe had yet to develop it fully. Well, what is a Druzina? It's a standing army, essentially, entirely at the disposal of the local authoritarian. Now, as he laid his father to rest, getting back to young Mieszko here, we can assume already he had a decent amount of leadership experience under his belt. His father was one of those at the pinnacle of his great tribe, and as hereditary succession was already firmly in place, Mieszko knew he was set to take over. So imagine him. He watched his father's body for the duration of its cremation. Sons could do no less to honor their father, he thought. Svarog, the one great god, would welcome his father, a great leader, into the afterlife. The smoke, rising, would join with Rarog, Svarog's firebird, and with every wing flap, Mieszko's father's essence would drift upward. Mieszko watched his father's tough, leathery skin crisp up, turn black, and then wither into ash rising into the air. Then the man's muscles dried out and popped and sizzled in the intense heat, a heat that the great Svarog would have appreciated. He stood unmoving for more than 3 hours as the sun sank below the horizon, the wind cooling as it continued to whip through his thick black hair. He admired his father, who had led the community for many years. His father was respected, yet still feared, and not just by his people. His enemies feared him as well. Mieszko's beard was still growing in. How would he earn the same respect and fear at such a young age? There was nothing left of the funeral pyre at this point, and Mieszko's eyes, when he turned his head back toward the village, had a difficult time adjusting to the lack of light. Svarog's fire seemed to have penetrated into him completely as he stared at the flames, entering through his eyes and becoming a part of him. Mieszko knew that in order to become as great as his father, he had to do something as great as his father. He needed to become something as great as his father. Or as every son feels about his father, he needed to become something greater than his father. Turning away from the pyre and its sinking flames, Mieszko waved to the men standing nearby to collect his father's ashes. They would be gathered in an urn, those that didn't blow into the heavens, that is, and placed on a mound of earth for all time. Mieszko made a note and prayed to Svetovid, the four-faced god of war, fertility, and abundance, that he would one day erect a monument to the divine model of existence, a reminder that he too will be cremated and placed in an urn one day. As he walked back toward the festivities, beginning a ways away in the village, he began thinking about how his life would go on.
This school year, let the Walmart app ace your kid's favorite subject, snack time. With Nature Valley Crunchy Granola and Danimals smoothies, they'll actually wake up for. Craft Lunchables for a truly refined cafeteria palate, or Gatorade for when they take Capture the Flag a bit too seriously. Get all their on-the-go cravings delivered right to your door, just in time for that opening bell. New school year, all the snacks. The Walmart you thought you knew is now new.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso Virtual Coffee Machines. Ready to enjoy the bold flavors of barista-quality Nespresso iced coffee at home? Simply fill a glass with ice and press the brew button on your virtual pop machine to enjoy rich double espressos roasted to stand up even when chilled. Refreshingly bold iced coffee. Refreshingly easy to make at home. Visit Nespresso.com to shop now.
Now, after a 40-year absence of an emperor, in the year 962, the German king Otto I was crowned as the new emperor, beginning what would be an 800-year-long empire with an unending string of German emperors. Otto I had a long, winding path to his coronation as emperor, which began way back in 936 when he was elected king of Aachen, the ancestral capital of Charlemagne's empire. From there, it was a very tough road, quelling all the family revolts and various rebellions across Central Europe, but he did what it took to establish and maintain order, and fully earning the title of King of Germany. In 951, Adelaide, Dowager Queen of the Kingdom of Italy, not to be confused with the Papal States, which was very different, asked for his help. Well, he married Adelaide, becoming king of both Germany and Italy, which was a prerequisite for becoming Holy Roman Emperor, mind you. 4 years later, he successfully defended Italy and Germany from the encroaching Magyars at the Battle of Lechfield, and another 7 years passed until Pope John XII crowned him Holy Roman Emperor, reviving the absent title. And though Aachen was where Charlemagne made his capital and home, almost 2 centuries earlier, Otto created a capital in Magdeburg. Now, a year after becoming emperor, Emperor Otto I exchanged the pope who made him emperor with one more to his liking. Pope Leo VIII vied for the title, though, with Pope John XII, who simply wouldn't give up the title, making the Catholic Church's leadership, as well as Otto's role in Europe, difficult to say the least. But in 964, Pope John XII died, leaving Pope Leo VIII as the sole Bishop of Rome. Now, this was the context for Mieszko's rise in terms of the major power in his area. The Holy Roman Empire would be a pivotal entity in Mieszko's life, as well as the establishment of a proper Polish state. To his south was a rising power in its infancy as well. The windswept, rolling plains of Hungary still had 40 years before it was reorganized into a kingdom. But this ancient land had seen migration after migration of Asian steppe peoples over the millennia, from the truly ancient Celts to the Huns of late antiquity, and by the 9th and 10th centuries, a newer group called the Magyars moved in. These Magyars were fierce horse warriors, but largely they were pagan nomads, shifting with the seasons across the plains. But they were very quickly coalescing and forming larger communities, thus centralizing their power and creating a firm hierarchy, all the while intermingling with the Slavic and Hun peoples already living there. Though the Croats and the Serbs to the southwest caused trouble, those were largely minor and localized problems to be solved. However, the Bulgars to the south and the Pechenegs to their east were the real threats. Hungarians, though, took as many beatings as they gave, and besides, it really helped that the Bulgars in the late 10th century had a new powerful foe in the Byzantine Emperor, Basil II, who would soon be called, as we know, Basil the Bulgar Slayer. Still the greatest name. He didn't earn that nickname for nothing, though, and the Hungarians took advantage of the relative peace while the Bulgars looked south. And the Pechenegs were also in conflict with the Byzantines, but their attentions were mainly against Vladimir the Great's Rus Varangians to their north. After the Battle of Lechfield in 955, a very pivotal battle, mind you, the Hungarians came under new management, presumably because their former Grand Prince, I don't even want to try to pronounce it, was killed in battle. But some records indicate that he abdicated his title in favor of another survivor of Lechfield, a local Magyar ruler named Taxani. This new guy, Grand Prince Taxani, he would lead Hungary toward a period of recovery initially, as the loss of more than 7,000 Hungarians at Lechfield was a staggeringly tragic loss at the time. Under his reign, Pecheneg groups and migrating Muslim groups settled inside Hungary, greatly diversifying the Magyars already present. These Muslim groups were actually a breakaway group of Cumans seeking refuge from the Rus out east. And Taxani even married into one of the leading Cuman families to solidify relations between the pagan and Muslim peoples in the area. And in the 960s, Grand Prince Taxani also married his son, Geza, into the ruling family in Transylvania, establishing firm peace along a portion of his southern border. And finally, when it comes to Mieszko's eastern context in the 960s, I would urge you to listen to episode 27, entitled The Kievan Rus of this podcast, for more information on the Eastern Front. Now, suffice it to say, Prince Sviatoslav I of Kiev would soon die, leaving his son Yaropolk I to bully and murder his brothers in order to rule. Now, his reign would end in 980 when a new ruler would take over, Yaropolk's escaped brother and former Prince of Novgorod, Vladimir. We're jumping a bit ahead here, but this would lead to Grand Prince Vladimir the Great of the Kievan Rus making serious connections with Constantinople and even converting the Rus officially to the Eastern Orthodox Christianity in the year 988. Now, with Mieszko's context firmly in our grasp, let's return. Gniezno sat atop an area higher than the lands around it. And as Mieszko walked toward the fires and people gathered in its center to hold a celebration honoring their late leader, as well as their new leader, the comforting smell of roasting meat just reached his nose. He thought about the state of things and how he might insert himself into regional politics in a bold statement, saying that he was the new leader. Far and wide, everyone would know, not just in Gniezno. Thanks to his father and grandfather, Gniezno was the regional capital of sorts, the two warrior chiefs having overcome many of the tribes around. He was the newest head of the powerful Piast house, and in order to keep the Piast as the ruling family, he had to come up with a quick and decisive campaign. What Mieszko may have dreamed about, but had no way of knowing, in 960, was that within 6 years, Ibrahim ibn Yaqub, that Jewish chronicler passing through we mentioned earlier, would refer to him as the King of the North, which is just plain cool if you ask me. That, though, would be proof positive that whatever happened between the time Mieszko burned his father on a funeral pyre to the year 966, it's certain that Mieszko had made the impact he was looking to make. In fact, it was in the 960s that we began to see a proto-Poland begin to form under Mieszko's leadership. A large reason why Mieszko grew the Gniezno state so rapidly was due to the fact that, while his Slavic, Czech, Pomeranian, and Polish neighbors continued to focus on agricultural and cultural advancements, he focused on recruiting soldiers into his army. Well, sure, Mieszko definitely recruited fellow Poles, but he also wasn't shy about looking further outward, a first for the people of his region. He recruited Norman, German, and Varangians, among others, to join his own personal elite guard. This core group became the heart of his army at large. Now, this wasn't cheap, though. Not when there were other theaters around the continent much more active and actively recruiting, too, such as the Eastern Roman Empire, the Cordoba Caliphate, the Danes, and the Lombards pushing deeper into the Italian peninsula. Mieszko had to make it worth their while to stay in Gniezno. He increased trade with more distant markets, opening up both Gniezno as well as surrounding towns and villages to the larger economy of medieval Europe. Salt was a huge import, but copper, tin, amber, and the metals needed for tools and weapons such as axes and swords, well, these were also hot commodities in the 960s to 970s. Mieszko's Poles were excellent farmers and hunters, so wheat, tree fruit, and pelts were big exports for the Polans. However, when the Slavs and Poles themselves, though the target for centuries in the slave trade, from Ireland to Western Africa, and from Norway to Constantinople, well, Mieszko too joined the slave economy and participated in that market, raising enormous amounts of money to feed his expansion. But it still wasn't quite enough. So Mieszko invaded Pomerania, of course. The eastern portion of Pomerania, including the port town of Gdansk, was quickly subdued and came under Piast rule. However, the western portion remained in control of German, Danish, and Wendish leaders. As for Mieszko's south, unfortunately, the Czechs proved too much for a time, which forced Mieszko to seek outside support. Quote-unquote, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, seemed to be Mieszko's strategy. And so he arrived in the court of the Holy Roman Emperor Otto I as early as 963. But we first hear of a deal between the two in 965, and Mieszko's Gniezno proto-state became a vassal state of Otto's in exchange for assistance in defeating the Veleti. Wait, what? The Veleti? Yes, the Veleti. The Veleti were currently in cahoots with the Czechs against Mieszko's Gniezno state, but they were also not on great terms with the empire either. So by removing the Veleti from the equation, Mieszko was able to cut some of the Czech support. But Otto also asked something else of Mieszko: accept Christianity. We're not exactly sure about who it was who really made that a requirement of friendship, though, because while Mieszko was skillfully dealing with the German king, he was also meeting with Boleslav I, ruler of Bohemia, who wasn't a huge friend of the Czechs either. And part of that peace deal between Gniezno and Bohemia was a marriage alliance. The pagan Mieszko was to marry Boleslav's daughter, Dubrovka, a Christian. She was a devout Christian, and a strong woman at that, and she refused to marry Mieszko if he wasn't Christian. So between a German emperor and the Bohemian princess, it seemed Mieszko could hold out no longer. But Mieszko was no country bumpkin, easily pushed around by the cosmopolitan foreigners to fit their will. No, Mieszko was a sharp one, to say the least, and he somehow gathered the structural information of the Catholic Church as well, enough to know that all local churches and monasteries, well, they funnel into an archdiocese. And these archdioceses were located in what became regional centers of markets and power, culture, wealth, and influence. In exchange for Mieszko's vassalage and marriage and Christian conversion between his two new allies, that is, Mieszko pushed for an archdiocese to be located near Magdeburg. It was a brilliant stroke of genius. From the outset, what would become the Polish people would answer to no one but the Pope in Rome, as their churches did not funnel through Germany or Bohemia or anywhere else. This afforded Mieszko's people a strong semblance of autonomy within the Catholic Church, as well as giving them a fair amount of clout as the archdiocese expanded its circle of influence in the East. It's just brilliant. Within 2 decades, until Mieszko's death, a large number of primitive stone churches went up, and slowly but surely, the Polish people became Latin Christians. So, King of the North indeed, right? Though in reality, he was just getting used to being a vassal of the emperor at the same time, a king as well as a duke. We would see another with such a status in 1 century out west straddling the Channel, but that's neither here nor there at this point in time. King Mieszko of Poland was also Duke Mieszko I. Within his first 8 years in charge, Mieszko had taken Gniezno from a local seat of power and influence to a regional seat of power and influence. Mieszko's reign, it can easily be said, was the time period that the world first saw some semblance of what would become Poland. On the next episode, we follow Mieszko's later reign. Man, does it get interesting. I want to, again, take this moment to thank you, all of you Patreon supporters, for your generosity and your belief in the aims of this podcast. Until next time.
This episode is brought to you by FX's Alien Earth, the official podcast. Each week, host Adam Rogers is joined by guests, including the show's creator, cast, and crew, in this exclusive companion podcast. They will explore story elements, deep dive into character motivations, and offer an episode-by-episode behind-the-scenes breakdown of each terrifying chapter in this new series. Search FX's Alien Earth wherever you listen to podcasts.